Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take a deeper look into those internal versus external sources of stress, because it's important to identify that, because like I said, those internal sources of stress, we can start to do things so they aren't triggering us as much or sometimes at all. When I had done my research back in 2018, I had surveyed many parents, and I asked them what was their primary source of stress as a parent raising a child with special needs. And I took all of those responses, and I could relate to pretty much most of them. And I found that there were categories or common threads within the reported sources of stress. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the main areas that I found to be sources of stress, and I want you to go along with me and see which one you feel is external versus internal. So sources of stress come from thoughts and emotions associated with worries about the future. Many parents reported, their child is playing with another child and they're feeling worried. Will my child ever be able to have friends? Will they ever be able to play well with one? Right. So that worry, worrying about school, right? The thoughts and emotions associated with worries about the future was a very common trigger for a lot of us that make us feel, that add to that sense of overwhelm and stress. So I want you to look at your list, and did you have any thoughts or worries? And you may not have even identified that as a trigger, but this is something to be mindful of. Now, even though it is an external, so it's your child or your child's ability, but it's your thoughts about that, your fears about that can be the internal source of stress, okay? Perceived judgment of others. Is that an external or internal source of stress? Well, if someone is judging you and telling you at that moment something that basically you're sensing that they're judging you and pretty negatively, right? Then it is an external source of stress, definitely. But maybe you're perceiving that someone is judging you, but they haven't said anything at all. And so this can be, I feel, more of an internal source of stress because it's our thoughts and worries about what other people think of us. When I learned that this was a big trigger for me, I started to shift because it really did bring me down, especially my in-laws are wonderful, but it can be stressful when you're with family and your kids are having all these different challenges and you're feeling like, oh, they must think I'm the terrible parent. And that's a big source of stress for, I think, many of us. And I would always perceive, even though my mother-in-law, very nice, and she was always loving, but I always felt that she was looking at me thinking I should be doing something different, right? Or many of you can relate to that. She never came out and said it. But so whenever I would go to the in-laws, I would always feel this sense of dread because I knew I was going to be triggered by my own fears, my own perceptions. And so I didn't want to feel that way anymore because I still had to go to the in-laws. And so when I started to go and reframe it and think, you know what, I'm doing the best I can. I know I'm a good mom and I know I am there for my child. I'm really in this moment, giving them all I can. When I came from that space of confidence in myself and reframing the energy instead of from thinking she was judging me to reframing it to thinking, you know what, in the moment, I'm doing the best I can and I'm just going to have fun. I'm going to have fun with my kids. Going to the in-laws was much more enjoyable. So when you start to identify those internal triggers and see where you can shift them, they're not going to be that same source of stress that they were in the past. So we'll dive deeper into those when we get into the Develop a Healthy Mindset section or part of this course. that it's so important. But first we have to figure out what is triggering us, right? And so the perceived judgment was definitely one that was a very, very large trigger for many of us. Child's behaviors and special needs, that's definitely a source of stress. Now, that is external, right? So the behaviors and their needs, so definitely external, but it's also partly internal because it's how we feel about those needs and how prepared we are to approach those challenging behaviors. And that's why you're here, to get some of those tools, but also to reframe how you're looking at it so it isn't such a trigger for you. Because I find, unfortunately, because of our children's challenges and their needs, it triggers a lot of guilt with us, a lot of sadness, and it really makes us, when our children are present and they trigger that response of sadness, of guilt within us, it compromises how we show up for our kids. So this is why it's important to know that if this is a trigger for you, we need to write that down. We need to know that that is something that evokes that emotional response of guilt, shame, when you see your child do something or not be able to do something. So this is why this is important to go through these ABCs to see what are those triggers. And educational barriers, I think a lot of us face this too. This is a big trigger for many of us. Now, this is external, but it also can be internal on how we feel about the current situation with our child's school, how confident we are in that he is getting the best support. And so there are definitely external, but there are also internal too, is our resources of how to approach the school, our level of understanding of what our kids should get in the school and how to approach that. So that's an internal and external source of stress. And the last one is not engaging in self-care practices. This is a big source of stress for many of us. And because when we are giving as caregivers, if we are not taking the time to give back to ourselves, to bring that energy back to ourselves and make sure we are balancing what we are giving and receiving, then we are definitely going to be more prone to be in that overwhelm, burnout stage, and our well-being is going to be compromised. So these are major components that impact our sense of overwhelm that we're going to be addressing through the rest of this workshop.